Far beyond the mountains and deep forests, there was a magical place filled with glowing flowers, sparkling rivers, and tiny flying fairies. And among them lived a little fairy named Pico. The Whispering Meadow was the most magical place in the world. Tiny fairies danced through the sky like butterflies, while glowing flowers swayed gently in the wind. Pico loved flying more than anything else. She zipped through the clouds, chased butterflies, and laughed happily as her silver wings sparkled in the sunlight. One morning, Pico decided to fly farther than ever before. "Be careful," warned the older fairy Luna. "The weather feels strange today." But Pico smiled confidently. "I'll be fine." Pico soared high above the crystal hills. The sky was bright blue, and fluffy clouds floated around her. Everything felt magical and wonderful. But suddenly, dark clouds rolled across the sky. The wind became wild and powerful. Rain poured down, and lightning flashed everywhere. Pico tried her best to fly back home, but the storm pushed her around like a tiny leaf. She flapped her wings harder and harder, but the wind was too strong. Then, suddenly, crack! A powerful gust of wind threw Pico into a tree branch. Her beautiful silver wings tore apart. Pico fell softly into the wet grass below. Rain dripped from her dress as she looked at her broken wings. Tears filled her eyes. "How will I ever fly again?" she whispered sadly. Without her wings, Pico felt helpless and alone. Just then, tiny voices came from the grass. A group of little ants marched toward her. One brave ant stepped forward. "Hello," he said kindly. "My name is Tito." Pico explained everything. The ants listened carefully. Then Tito smiled and said, "Maybe we can help." The tiny ants quickly got to work. Some carried soft green leaves. Others brought colorful flower petals and sticky tree sap. Together, they carefully built tiny new wings. When the ants finished, Pico gasped in amazement. The little wings were made from leaves and flower petals. They weren't perfect, but they were beautiful. Pico flapped the tiny wings nervously. For 1 second, she lifted into the air. But then, plop! She fell right back into the grass. "Try again!" the ants cheered loudly. Pico looked at their smiling faces. Even though they were tiny, they believed in her. Every day, Pico practiced harder and harder. Sometimes she crashed into flowers. Sometimes she spun sideways. And once, she landed in a muddy puddle. But she never gave up. Little by little, Pico became stronger. She realized that true flying wasn't only about wings. It was also about courage. One beautiful evening, Pico stood on a small rock. She took a deep breath, flapped her tiny wings, and flew. She soared across the glowing sunset sky. Not perfectly, not quickly, but bravely. The ants jumped and cheered below. "You did it, Pico!" they shouted happily. When Pico returned to the fairy village, everyone stared at her tiny handmade wings in surprise. Pico smiled proudly and said, "I lost my wings in the storm, but I found something even more important: courage." And from that day on, Pico never feared challenges again, because she learned something truly magical. True strength comes from never giving up.